I ended my thinking last time with the French level of participation in the Great Peace of 1701, where diplomats from dozens of tribal nations met to reforge and create new political and trade pacts. The French hosted and had a paper to sign for their history books. But importantly, while our history suggests that this was all about the French Empire, the reality is that indigenous diplomatic protocols played as vital a role as any pen and ink. And it's from here that we look at what will become that diplomatic frontier for the next century, influencing everything through the fledgling American government a century later. And to do this, we're going to start big and then see how it all narrows down into some critical cultural differences. This chapter is called the Native Inland Sea. And this is a phrase that Black Hawk uses to help reframe how you and I think about the region. The French would call it Pays d'Enhaut, or the upper country, and the British various terms like the West or frontier. None of these have any real relevance to the understanding and ways of use by the many peoples who have lived there for centuries. In fact, Black Hawk himself borrows the term from one of the first known First Nations writers, who wrote a poem using the term in 1838. Now, I will confess my complete inability to pronounce her name properly, even with rehearsals and practices, and so in respect, I won't butcher it in an attempt. Our own history will name her Jane Johnston Schoolcraft, her married name to her husband Henry Rose Schoolcraft, an American explorer of the Great Lakes, and here in Michigan there's a fair amount of stuff named after him. But Jane Johnston was the daughter of an Irish fur trader and an Ojibwe chief, and her Ojibwe name here, as a caption, translates to "woman of the sound that the stars make rushing through the sky." And with a name like that, among so many other accomplishments, she wrote poetry. Two important ideas here then, I think. First, this intermarriage and commingling of literacies is one sign of how unclear and dynamic the divisions between everyone really were. We tend to talk in terms of sweeping political changes in the broad view, but humans meeting are humans meeting. And in this same period, such intercultural congress will produce itself an entire nation of peoples, the Métis, or Métis in French. The second point is that Black Hawk chooses the phrase Native Inland Sea as a new term from native peoples. You're not going to find the area referred to in other books before Black Hawk's. His choice of the term is itself an historical reclamation of an area that is not an unmapped void, but a deeply loved, spiritually significant, and politically claimed home. We're on native ground here too then. It's a place of waterways and Great Lakes, the Ohio and Mississippi River roads, a vast system for trade, travel, diplomacy, managing resources. It's enormous, and was the home of the ancient and powerful 𝐍𝐞𝐝 people, along with dozens of other nations. When the Europeans arrived here, we have now a massive commingling of people, of languages and exchanges, no one dominated because of the size and wealth of the region. Earlier native refugees from wars had fled here, along with traders and some settlers. We might think of it over time finally as an enormous and fluid, multi-ethnic compromise, where everyone came to depend upon one another for trade. Black Hawk and other historians will often call it the middle ground. Now, as a middle ground, it was hardly without conflict, of course. Regional, local disputes, they happened regularly, largely through misunderstandings of what the area represented to them. Lieutenant Colonel George Washington would make some terrible military choices here, leading to what we often call the French and Indian War, but might better be termed the 7 Years' War, sparked here in the Inland Sea, but which quickly spread globally. The politics of the region was sensitive, and a survival strategy for everyone who did not ignorantly stumble into it before and after was simply mediation. If you want to live and thrive in a place, you can either choose to fight and foment chaos, or you can find spaces to mediate and negotiate differences to resolve them. The native peoples, active brokers of power in this area, often met with European leaders who themselves would travel days to reach the indigenous villages for talk. It became a key component to French politics in the region. And this is important because the French understood what the later British did not. And I said earlier that the conflicts largely arose around misunderstandings of what the area represented. Let me dig in on that a little. These misunderstandings weren't just about territory or counting animal hides and the like. What was at stake for the indigenous nations, and they understood this, was nothing less than a way of life. How they had come to manage the resources of these spaces and think about the world that they were in. And for most of us listening, I want to make room for an enormous concept here which we will revisit a lot, I suspect. Indigenous knowledge. Let's consider for a moment that the geography we live in conditions how we come to understand how to live. An Inuit will live and follow customs and have knowledge of things that are different from, say, the Aymara or Guarani of South America. Every people, including Europeans, have a unique conception of how the universe functions and how to use that conception to survive and thrive. We see pretty stereotypical simplifications of indigenous knowledge in movies like Dances with Wolves or Pocahontas. We might find better ones in films like Wind River, the documentary Gather, or even the TV show Reservation Dogs. Black Hawk in this chapter spends time distinguishing between the European conception of linear time, which intimates the aspiration of progress, and the indigenous ideas which are more cyclical or relation-based or place-based conceptions of time. And so it becomes a challenge to form agreements, treaties, to mediate, without taking the nature of thought and understanding into account. Story after story, account after account in our history and in our fictions has different peoples pointing to each other and saying nothing they do makes sense. It all makes sense, but what is sensible is never really common sensible. One more bit of indigenous knowledge is worth bringing up here because Black Hawk does. While each tribe has its own similar word for this, the Ojibwe, for instance, have hemane, which literally means half man, half woman. This is also more commonly in English today called two-spirit or two-spirit people. As time can be understood differently, so also can social and gender understandings. What's critical about this term, of course, is that such hemane could and did have social authority in their communities. They were mediators, healers, leaders of ceremonies, had balanced perspectives, even led wars. And until the arrival of Christian missionaries to the native inland sea, they were revered by their communities. All of this is to say that when we limit our history to treaties and wars, we miss all the cultural and nuanced complications of human encounter, and we erase entire systems for understanding the world.